Hello, I'm Gordon Lang, editor of CameraLabs.com. Chase Jarvis is one of the best known and most respected photographers around right now, delivering campaigns for clients including Apple, Nike, Volvo, Emirates and Red Bull. It was during his campaign for the Nikon D90 though that many of us were first introduced to his behind the scenes footage. And indeed it was on Chase's blog that I first discovered he was shooting a campaign in Queenstown, New Zealand, the home of Camera Labs. I caught up with Chase during one of his very rare breaks to discuss his varied cameras, his love of social networking, and to learn more about becoming and being a professional commercial photographer. Chase Jarvis, thank you very much for talking to us today.
My pleasure.
We're in Queenstown, in the Heritage Hotel.
We are.
What are you doing in Queenstown, may I ask?
Queenstown, let's see. This particular trip, I'm shooting a commercial campaign for SanDisk, the manufacturers of the memory cards that we all love. And it's one of my favorite places on the planet. I come here quite a bit, down to Queenstown. It's opposite seasonally from those of us in the northern hemisphere, and so companies, agencies, whatnot, they like to come down here because we've got a 6-month lead time on all the advertising stuff that we shoot. So down here working like crazy.
I'd like to learn a bit more about the commissioning process when a client approaches you to do a job.
Generally speaking, the process goes something like this. I'm contacted by an advertising agency or a client directly because sometimes they don't work with advertising agencies, and they say we're interested in you for this particular project. It's a campaign for X or Y or Z. So there's a dialogue that starts off, and that usually proceeds quickly because things in the advertising world, they seem to me at least to always be in a hurry-up fashion. From their perspective, they're kind of interviewing me to make sure that I would be a good match for the job, and a lot of that has to do with my work. The work is the first kind of, and it's the primary means by which they decide who to invite into the pool that they're considering. So they'll look at my online portfolio. Occasionally they'll call in my portfolio and say, we liked what we saw online, we want you to submit a book, and we're looking at 3 other photographers. So we'll put together a portfolio and send that in. So it's a real proper pitch on your side of things then? Pitch, when I think the word pitch, it's I think more proactive on my part. And this is, you know, the scenario that I'm painting here is a little bit more reactive. I was contacted, and don't get me wrong, I'm pursuing clients that I want to work for, but in this case, they contact me, I say yes, I'm interested, I submit a portfolio if they request it. Nowadays, since everything's moving online, there are less requests for a physical portfolio because so much work and the volumes of information about photographers and directors is available online. The creative stuff is what really fires me up. We have a couple conversations about that, and then if things look good for me, they're interviewing me, and I'm also interviewing them because I want to make sure that I'm shooting the clients that I feel like I'm a good match for.
Yeah.
And if everything goes smoothly, and we go like that, then some money talk happens, and rights negotiations and timing and schedules, and then we sign on the dotted line, and you put the hammer down on production and you start going like crazy.
So in terms of the actual production itself and the creative process, how much does the client direct you, or do you direct them? I mean, have they got a real kind of focused idea of what they want you to do?
Well, I think historically it's been more handed a kind of a directive, and it's evolving, and I don't know if it's the position or the timing of my personal career, it's an evolution in the industry, but increasingly I'm asked, here's our goal, this is kind of what we think we're doing, what do you think?
Right.
And so it is a collaborative process, and this, you know, there's a spectrum here, so sometimes it's, you know, take a picture of the red car and the woman and the tree on the left, and then in some cases it's like, you know, what's the best, I mean, we don't even know if we want to shoot video or stills, what's the best method. Sometimes it's very, very specific, you know, down to where someone's hand's going to be in the frame, and art directors, you know, just 10 people on set deciding if it looks better if, you know, he holds the Red Bull can like this or like that. And then other times we've kind of put, the analogy I'll use is put some rails up, and there's room for us to bounce around in the middle. And, you know, having flexibility for that magic when you sense that stuff happening on set and be able to follow that thread, that's the stuff that I like the best, where there's some wide parameters and you can just go crazy.
And what about in terms of things like the location and models, or in the case of this shoot you're doing in Queenstown, actual professional athletes?
Sure.
Are these your choices, or would the client say, look, we sponsor this guy, we want him in the shoot, or where does that come together?
Sure. There's a whole spectrum as far as that goes as well. From one end of the spectrum is, what do you think? We really want to do this. This is an idea we have. You're an expert in this. What are your thoughts? To, this celebrity endorses us. You're going to shoot George Clooney on a gray backdrop at the Four Seasons Hotel in New York on the 30th of June, and you have 15 minutes.
Right.
So it really is the broad spectrum.
So you're here in Queenstown shooting professional skiers and snowboarders for this sand disc. Would you then go to them, look guys, if you want some snow shots, we're looking at New Zealand or South America at this point, and it's going to take me this long.
Yeah.
So is that, and then they have to decide whether that's.
Yeah, and then there's a discussion about if that's the direction they want to go. Sometimes the budget doesn't allow it, and you have to go to Alaska. For me, just from a flight up the coast to Alaska, may be cheaper, but then you're working on a glacier in summer, which everything's brown and it's clearly not winter, or you do a lot of Photoshop magic and smoke and mirrors to make it seem like it is. But I think the companies that are the most that are really on top of their game, they understand that there's a certain value, and really location. 90% of what I do is location based, and so the people that approach me, they approach me because I have a really good knowledge. I've shot all over the world. I haven't shot everywhere. There's millions of places that I'm still dying to go to, but it really is. So, what do you think, Chase? And I'm saying, if we're going to do winter, I want to go here or here, and then it does come. Creatively, I always have my first choice. If the budget rules that out, then we'll go down to B and C. But if there is the budget, then it usually does come down to, this is what I'm interested in. We make the numbers work, and then we go for it. So
in terms of the length of the shoot, you're here in Queenstown for, is it 1 week, 2 weeks?
It's just shy of 2 weeks. It's 12 days, 13 days, Kate, something like that. Anyway, 12 in all.
Would this be a long shoot typically? Would you do something in as little time as a day or a couple of days?
Yeah, the actual shooting sometimes takes place in a day. However, the planning for that day is weeks sometimes. And again, going back to sometimes how scripted things are, and you have to get this exact set of clothing that's being manufactured right now overseas, and it'll be here on the 22nd, and then on the 23rd we have 1 day to shoot it before it goes on to the television campaign or something like that. So sometimes it's very, very particular, and sometimes it's a lot longer. And shoots range from 1 day to 30, and this one being 10 or 12 is pretty much right in the middle. I'd say the average is probably about 4 days.
So for a 12-day shoot or something like that, how many images or minutes of video is the client actually expecting you to deliver at the end of this?
Generally speaking, there are very, very narrow deliverables, a certain number of pictures, and in this case, and in most cases, that number is very small. But again, so much energy and time goes into making a handful of images with great care. Sandus has been cool enough to let me reveal a lot of behind the scenes that I wouldn't normally otherwise, because of non-disclosure agreements and things to be able to talk about. And they've been really cool, allowing me to discuss some of the things in the shoot. And I've been encouraging questions and whatnot, and one of the questions came in. It said, "I bet you shoot hundreds of pictures a day."
Yeah, it's a lot more than that, right?
I can shoot hundreds of pictures in under a minute, and especially when I'm motor driving the best ski and snowboard athletes in the world at 8 frames a second, thousands and thousands a day. And in this case, we'll probably end up shooting a couple weather days. We'll probably shoot 5 days, somewhere between 3 and 5,000, or 3 and 5,000 pictures a day.
That's a lot of images to sort through.
That is a lot of data.
Who does that?
Well, we have a whole team that I'm lucky enough to be a part of. Digital asset managers, my right-hand man, my left-hand man. Got a couple producers on staff. Kate, who I keep referring to off camera over here, Mikal back in the studio, D'Artagnan back in the studio. Scott is here in New Zealand with us, along with Chris. And then we've got a couple of local folks that we've brought on board. Phil, our New Zealand producer, and Raj, a camera assistant here. Specifically with the data on this trip, it's Scott who's managing all that, and he's Scott's been a part of our crew for years and years and years, coming on 10 years now. Normally that role is one that D'Artagnan plays, as the digital asset manager, but we've got a lot of stuff going on right now at our Seattle studio, so we had to have a couple folks stay back. So we are feeling a little undergunned given the amount of data and the fact that we opted to share a lot of the stuff. So we're, as an example, I went to bed at about 3 last night and was up at 6:45. So, and I've done
It's
that.
not an easy job. Anyone thinking of getting into professional photography?
Yeah,
It's not a walk in the park.
Yeah, I just tweeted that today. If you want to be a professional photographer, I recommend you don't consider banker's hours.
Yeah, that's right.
As part of the job.
So it's still an enormous amount of material to work through, all these images. Do you start doing it actually on location, or do you leave it all until you get back to base in Seattle?
Typically, the cards, they leave my hand to the back of my camera. They go to an assistant, and that assistant either passes them to a digital asset manager who's on set, or pockets them. And in most commercial environments, specifically the larger campaigns and things, it's getting downloaded right on set to bring a workstation out there, monitors, or a laptop in a protective case, and we're downloading them, making sure we're getting the things we want to get, and that we don't go back to the bar and scratching our head and high-fiving each other, thinking we've got it, and only to find out that we didn't. So when people are spending this much time and energy getting together to create some pictures, we want to make sure we got them.
Looking at a different kind of client, you became very well known to the camera enthusiast community when you did the D90, the Nikon.
Mm-hmm.
I should say right now, I'm from England, so I say Nikon, you're going to say Nikon.
Yeah, I think cool. The rest of the world says Nikon, and us goofy Americans.
What's the right pronunciation?
I think everybody except goofy Americans says Nikon, so it's probably the right way, but I find it impossible for me to spill over into the proper way of saying it. So you say Nikon, I say Nikon, you say potato, I say potato.
Let's call the whole thing off.
Sure.
So looking at that D90 campaign, I mean, that was really interesting because they, well, first of all, it was the first time that anybody had seen video on a DSLR.
Yes.
But also in terms of what they asked you to do. Were they a different kind of client because they're a photography client, and they're obviously, they want you to say nice things about the camera and to show the camera in a good light?
Right.
Well, is it a really different client compared to, say, SanDisk, or you've also worked for Apple and Microsoft? Is it a different kind of brief? Actually,
it was very similar. It was pretty much working with an advertising agency, and the kind of the campaign had spilled out over a couple different agencies and a couple different continents simultaneously. But the main one was an agency for Nikon in Japan, and I got that same exact process that I described earlier. I guess the Nikon, the fact that it was a camera manufacturer and I'm a photographer, that it was interesting because I had their ear a little bit more than I might have, and again, as one of the first people to bring behind-the-scenes videos to the mass public, I admit I was thinking about it, but it wasn't part of the original campaign in any way, shape, or form. They came to me. It was a below-the-line print campaign that was going all over the world. It was very interesting to be the first photographer on the planet to really get to use the first camera, the first DSLR that has HD video built into it. That's kind of a little bit mind-blowing to me, and one of the reasons I think I got the job was because I was doing a lot with video. I'm very interested in the convergence of those two formats, and so I think that actually had something to do with them liking me for the job, because I was also directing some motion stuff, commercials and whatnot. Again, it started out as a very typical campaign, and I said, I'm interested in doing behind-the-scenes video, and they said, well, there was resistance, and I just kind of kept like, it would be really neat if I could share this, given that you are a camera manufacturer. I know it doesn't really change things as far as transactionally for us, but wouldn't it be neat if? And at some point, I don't know if they were tired of me or they saw the wisdom.
You wore them down.
Yeah, and they were, again, thought it was pretty cool for them to let me do it, and I'm told it was the most successful camera launch in the history of the company, and I think one of the things we can take away from it is that all I did with the video, I mean, the print campaign, standalone on its own, it went out and helped them sell cameras, which is their goal. For my goal, it was just kind of invoking as much creativity as possible. They come, I've done a blog post that says photographers push your art directors. So they come to me with a proposal. This is what we'd like to do, and I'll definitely make sure we get all those things accomplished. But I'm also always saying, what if we could do this? What if we could, push them a little bit? And I think, the pushing that I did with both the Still campaign and then with asking them about this video stuff, it it really paid off for both them and me. And as a purely creative endeavor, I'm always looking for ways to create and to share, and it was a great opportunity. It changed, yeah, and it changed things for. Then my good friend, Vince LaFerre was able to do something similar with the Canon, and I think prior to my doing it with the D90, a camera had always been sold with a spec sheet and a picture of the camera, and this was the first time in the history of the world that it had been. Here's this video, that goes along with it, and it was just basically a behind the scenes of what was going on, and maybe it put a lifestyle component to technology, put a face to technology. So I like to think that I sure had a blast doing it.
In part 2 of this interview at cameralabs.com, Chase talks about the different cameras he uses for different situations, his love of social networking and blogging, and what kind of photos he likes to take when not under the pressures of a commercial shoot. You can find part 2 of this interview at cameralabs.com.